Good morning and welcome. This is a beautiful day and we're thrilled to be here to present our work, the work of the Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia, and the work we do, very important work that we do with the Reckoning Project. So I look forward to telling you about this project. My name is Geneviève Zubrzycki. I'm a professor of sociology. I need to get used to my new title. I'm the William H. Sewell Jr. Collegiate Professor of Sociology and Director of the Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia. I'm also the principal investigator of the Reckoning Project at WCEE, which is the theme of today's panel. I will introduce the panelists and then start by telling you about the project, its origins, and what we do before giving the floor to our student and research coordinator. So in terms of introduction, I will start by the person at the other end of the table, my partner, Arina Bustillos, who's the research project coordinator of the Reckoning Project at WCEE. She holds an undergraduate degree in applied sociology from St. Petersburg State University and a master's degree in international and regional studies from the University of Michigan with a specialization in Russian, East European, and Eurasian studies. So she's one of ours. She has what we call a MEERS degree. And we recruited her immediately. We thought she was the perfect person to be helping me, working closely with me and students for this project. Arina coordinates and oversees all administrative and research aspects of the Reckoning Project at WCEE, managing the translation and data analysis teams, and also acting as a liaison with any external entities being at the university or with the Reckoning Project people in Ukraine, in the US, and in Western Europe. Kristin Foringer is a PhD candidate in sociology at the University of Michigan and has served as the data analysis supervisor at the Reckoning Project. Her research has been funded by the US Institute of Peace and the National Science Foundation, and Kristin uses comparative historical and qualitative research methods to study global human rights, transitional justice, and collective memory, particularly in the case of Colombia. I'm on her dissertation committee, and when we wanted a graduate student to also work with the undergraduate students on the project, I thought of Kristin immediately because of her own expertise in a different case, and also her, professionalism in managing all sorts of things. So very excited that she worked with us at the Reckoning Project. She worked closely with the undergraduate team to launch the data management and analysis phase of the WCEE collaboration. And last but not least, we have Sophia Grant, who is a research assistant for the Reckoning Project and a senior in the honors program at the University of Michigan. She's pursuing a double major in international studies and history, and she is also enrolled in a minor in sociology in the law, justice, and social change minor. Sophia is co-president of the Michigan Running Club and a member of the Blue Model United Nations, and she's currently working on a thesis focused on recent governmental responses to gang violence in El Salvador and Honduras. So in all of their different ways, they have expertise in the topic or in the region. I want to also welcome the other student researchers, undergraduate students and researchers in the Reckoning Project here on the table, and the front table. And I want to give a round of applause actually to our students who are working on this. And when I explain what they do, you will understand why. So I want to start by recognizing your important contribution to this project, which are multiple. I want to welcome also Arthur Mengosi, who's on the translation team and was also a MEERS graduate and is now enrolled in a PhD program in the Slavic department. So I will tell you about the the project and how it came about. So the Reckoning Project was founded by Janine DeGiovanni and Peter Pomerantsev, who are both renowned journalists. Janine DeGiovanni was a war reporter. She covered the war in Bosnia, Chechnya, Rwanda, Iraq, and Syria. And on February 24th, with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation, she immediately got in touch with Peter Pomerantsev, who's based in the UK, Ukrainian-born, I believe, but Ukrainian roots in any case. And they created this NGO in order to basically assist reporters in Ukraine on how to collect evidence of violent aggressions against civilian population, because Janine had been a witness and had tons of data collected in the different wars that she had covered. And when she was called as a witness to The Hague in the case of Bosnia and Rwanda, what she had to communicate to the court was not actually considered, enough to pass the bar of admissibility. So their initial idea is we need to train people on the ground so that whatever things that they witness, whatever testimonies that they collect, will basically be able to stand, in court and be admissible as evidence. So they recruited local reporters who overnight, they might have been local reporters covering city hall things, or small things in smaller and bigger towns across Ukraine. And they started basically training them on how to collect evidence and how to disseminate the evidence to the Ukrainian people, but also how to build longer stories in order to keep the interest in the war in Ukraine longer for international audiences. Janine knew and was very keen on making that known, that the public interest around wars is about 100 days. And beyond that, if you don't provide basically regular flow of information, regular stories that you publish in mainstream newspapers, but also in magazines, and have an active Twitter feed, Facebook, Instagram, people forget. And for this war, popular or international support is key to mobilize resources for Ukraine. And so that was the goal of Janine and Peter Pomerantsev. And they also recruited legal scholars who would also train these reporters on what to ask, what not to ask, how to vet testimonies. And so every Thursday afternoon, a team of Ukrainian reporters, together with veteran war journalists and legal scholars and other scholars like myself, who I was invited to join the board, to train the journalists on different topics. And it was very moving and impressive to see basically how these people were on the ground covering the beginning of the Russian aggression and occupation, and how some of them decided to quit and go on the front. Others recruited more. First responders also joined, like firemen, police officers became also reporters in the Reckoning Project. So I was invited because I have expertise in collective memory and commemorations and conflicts over memory. I was invited to join the advisory board. And I thought, oh my, there's so much to do, and the University of Michigan can certainly help. And what we did is to create different teams that would provide really important analytical, I hate to say service, but expertise for the Reckoning Project. So we created a course in the Department of Sociology that's really interesting. The Department of Sociology has a course in which students provide research assistance on a research project in exchange for course credit. The professors and the GSIs, the graduate teaching assistants, provide training on basic aspects of research. So we created this last fall, and we train students. For example, we help them get peer certification on basic research ethics. They get training also on IRB, the protection of data, anonymity, etc. And they get also training on vicarious trauma, how they can be affected by what they read, they analyze, how their judgment can be affected, how bias can be created by that. So we train them in all of this and in qualitative research methods. And this was done by myself and Kristin Foringer, and she will tell you more about this. And the students, I must say, we were very surprised and proud and impressed that all students, almost all, I think one could not, but who were enrolled in the SURO course, Sociology 394 in the fall, continued working for the Reckoning Project on a voluntary basis in the winter semester. And then we created a new course with a new cohort of research assistants. And all of them, nearly all of them, this summer we hired as research assistant and worked, continuing basically analyzing testimonies collected by the Reckoning Project's reporter on the ground in Ukraine. So you will hear a little bit about that. And another thing that, so the project has, of course, we provide expert analysis of testimonies that are collected. We also receive, sometimes they're already translated into English, but by Ukrainian speakers. So if they're not, we translate them, and that's Arthur Menkosi and Svetlana Rogovec in the Department of Slavic Studies are doing this. Otherwise, we edit the English to make sure that the text is actually understandable. And I would show you slides. I don't want to mess this up. Okay, what am I doing that's wrong? Okay. Okay, so translation and editing. So we get those testimonies that they can be like several pages long. We make sure that the English is perfect so that they can be also understood later on by lawyers who will read them. And then our students are doing a qualitative analysis, basically reading very carefully those testimonies and attributing categories to what they're reading, whether it's detention, for example, or violent aggression, bodily harm, kidnapping, etc. And students were very important in actually making the grid, the analytical grid, even finer grain. And then another phase of the project is to archive all the testimonies that we've been analyzing and to provide a commemorative space for that, so that we're moving now. So we analyzed 200 testimonies over, we edited or translated about 150, 12 students involved, and then the memorial recommendations that we made to the Reckoning Project. They asked us what we thought about, what kind of memorials we could create for Ukrainians. And then now we're creating an interactive map, an educational tool that Arina will tell you a little bit more about. So last fall we were at phase 0, and now we're nearly completion of the second phase of the memorial dimension. So this is a sociology course that we created, and you will hear more about that. I think that students are learning a lot, both about Ukraine, but also about the research process. Maybe they can tell you a little bit more. Sophia has been here for a year. She can tell you about how long it took to get started, and that's also part of research project. And one key thing that's very important is that the work that students are doing by reading these testimonies is actually used in Ukraine. So you had the chief legal counsel for the Reckoning Project here with Janine DiGiovanni and Peter Pomerantsev presenting the preliminary findings of their work, of our students' work, to the Attorney General of Ukraine, and later at that meeting to even President Zelensky. So actually, the work that we do here is very impactful, even though we don't see the results just yet. So again, the Reckoning Project, Janine is there with the General Counsel of the Reckoning Project at the UCSC just last month, presenting basically some of our work. We make sure that students are always involved in what we do. University of Michigan is obviously an educational institution, and we believe that everything that we do should involve students so that they can learn from the process. And I'm happy to say that some of them have gone on to law school and were prompted by actually their work on the Reckoning Project and the impact it had on their trajectory. What else should I say before? Is that it? Yeah, I'm going to move now to Kristin. But just to say that we hope to be continuing this project for the near future. Hopefully, we don't have to be doing this for 5 years. I think that the goal is to collect data as it becomes available and to educate both our students, university members, but also the greater public. And the next phase of the project is to deliver basically a website that shows in a very user-friendly way what we're finding on the ground. So thank you for your patience in hearing this kind of broad introduction. And now we're going to have different members of the group telling you about different sections of the project.
Is this on? Okay, can you hear me? Okay, thanks. So as Geneviève said, I'm a PhD candidate in sociology at the University of Michigan. So that's kind of my primary title, but I've helped since the beginning of this collaboration last August to kind of figure out a plan for how to incorporate students into this work. And also, I think even before that, figuring out what the role of a university is in collaboration with an NGO like this, especially overseas. What does a university in Ann Arbor, Michigan, how can we be involved in this kind of very locally based investigative effort to collect evidence of war crimes in Ukraine? And so Geneviève contacted me to see if I could help with leading a team of undergrads through, again, this course in the sociology department that is already kind of set up to bring in research assistants from an undergraduate level, either sociology majors or other social sciences. I think we had a lot of political science students our first year, or first semester. And typically this course is structured to help with obviously academic research, not really applied research. And so one of the primary kind of challenges at the beginning was figuring out how can you distill things into assignments, or how can you prepare and kind of prioritize the educational part of this opportunity while also keeping in mind the very real world impact. And so it was really interesting, I guess would be the word, for our first semester, because the Reckoning Project as an organization was still kind of getting its bearings and figuring out what their activities would look like. And here we are kind of with these rigid academic calendars and course credit and things like this that we were trying to bring into the mix. And so the students, I think probably the primary lesson they learned from this first semester was kind of this like interorganizational collaboration, or like how to be flexible, how to do work without knowing, is this the right method yet? Is this our, will this be kind of our system for processing data moving forward? Or like, do we have to kind of work out, some more details there? And so there's a lot of flexibility the first semester, a lot of communication, close communication between the Weiser Center and the Reckoning Project to figure out exactly like how can we be helpful. We have this whole team here, so what can we help with? So we kind of realized that our first area that we could be most helpful with is just managing the data coming in, using our kind of academic rigor to find ways to control just this huge amount of information from the testimonies, to translate them accurately, as Geneviève mentioned, and to really make them usable for use later by legal experts. So at the Weiser Center, we've kind of been a middleman between the ground level journalists and kind of the data side of things at the Reckoning Project, but then also this middle step to prepare testimonies to be like easily usable, searchable by like legal experts kind of at a later stage or concurrent with what we're doing. So that's kind of the structure, I would say. Something else I wanted to mention is just my own background. So as a PhD student, my kind of regional expertise in my own research has not been in Eastern Europe. And so I came in primarily with more expertise in Latin America, and my dissertation focuses on Colombia. But I look at transitional justice, issues of collective memory, issues of defining violence, commemorating violence. And these, I think, this has been a helpful perspective in figuring out kind of the right modes of working with these testimonies from Ukraine, and realizing, so kind of we have the journalistic standards here of what does a story mean from like a journalist standpoint, but then we have more of these like academic standards, but then we also have like a commemorative standard. So like the same testimony, like the same story, a witness's experience can be filtered through like these different kind of meaning-making processes. And so what I think is interesting is how we're now shifting to the commemorative aspect of, based on our experience in managing all of these testimonies, how can we help advise the Reckoning Project, on which Geneviève has kind of led this piece? How can we advise, like, what is the most appropriate or maybe helpful modes of commemoration for these kinds of events? So yeah.
I would say one thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it on or not?
I think it has to be red. Okay.
Is it on? Okay. One thing that, we're talking about testimonies, and you might not know, we're going to show you slides of what testimonies look like, what students do. But one thing that's difficult for a legal team is to try to actually establish patterns of criminality, or we're talking about potential war crimes. So you have narratives. Oh, and I'll let Sophia talk about how they do that. But you have narratives like this, and obviously they cannot read 200. So what we're trying to do is to kind of extract the right information on types of aggression or illegal activity, that then can be collated in different ways so that the data analyst can basically run regressions and identify that in that region of Ukraine, for example, this type of crime was committed, and when it was committed, people had, and I'm sorry to be gruesome, but a bag over their head or had tape over their mouth, for example. If they're able to show that there are actual patterns, they're able to suggest that troops were actually ordered to proceed that way. So what we're trying to do is really, the entire goal of extracting the information is to make it more digestible, and then to establish patterns across time and space, or relate this to a specific unit from the Russian army on the ground. And this is what's important. This is why collecting several testimonies and analyzing and having the data out becomes very helpful for the legal team.
Yeah, so, and just to kind of give some substance for what part of these crimes that we were looking at, the kind of larger categories would be torture, detention, forced disappearance, bombardment, and extrajudicial killing. So these were kind of broader categories that were that the Reckoning Project knew that they were interested in based on like UN standards, other human rights standards, and so again, we kind of just distilled these into different components of each crime to be able to identify. Kind of easily through, technically this is a software called Atlas TI, which isn't super complicated, but it's used often by like qualitative social scientists. So it's just a way of kind of labeling and organizing text information. So we would kind of upload each testimony into this platform and then basically use these codes as a set of highlights just so they could be easily searchable later.
And that is a key contribution actually of our team, because the data analysts at the beginning wanted us to code using Excel sheets, didn't trust that data. And we finally, after one semester, convinced them to move to something simple like this, and now they love it. So there's also a learning curve for us, but also for them, that we teach them different tools on how to organize the data. Yes.
Yeah. So definitely, again, that's where like a university can assist these kind of more grassroots efforts. And obviously, it's not only grassroots, like there are a ton of experts within the Reckoning Project already. But yeah, I'm trying to think. So I also wanted to mention something that makes the Reckoning Project's work unique, or why the Ukrainian case is so distinct for this kind of work. And this is something that has been echoed by like the board members, I know, is that this is kind of proactive commemoration is kind of how I would label it. So the violence is unfolding. It's still very active, but the way that judicial systems work with such a lag means that it's very important to be kind of working, managing testimonies, producing evidence in kind of real time. And also the unique case of having so much social media coverage, so much available data as compared to other conflicts in the past, means that this kind of work is possible, and that you don't have to wait until there's some sort of ending point to begin recovering facts. And so I think that, makes this a very unique context.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sophia.
Just turn it off. Okay. Excuse me. Yeah, again, hi, I'm Sophia. I am a senior here at the University of Michigan, and I have been working with the Reckoning Project for over a year now. So I started off the first year of that as a participant in the Soro course. So I was enrolled in 2 credits for that, so that was 6 hours per week that I was doing coding, and then we would have weekly meetings to sort of talk about how things were going. It was a very fluid process, again, as we kind of mentioned, starting off with like the spreadsheet and then shifting to Atlas TI, and that we had to be pretty adaptable to that change. And it was also like, there's also some other challenges associated with that. For example, given that this is an active, ongoing conflict, there's periods of time where we're getting a lot of testimonies all at once, and there's periods of time where we're really not getting much at all, because that's kind of the nature of an ongoing conflict. You can't necessarily get regular information at the same time. So that was another thing that, if we were a little low on testimonies, maybe we would do a lot more readings about collective memory, commemoration, which helped a lot with helping create the report of what kinds of commemoration memorials did we want to have to suggest to the Reckoning Project for this conflict. But I think one of the most important things about this is the experience that we got from working with the data. I've never had any experience working with any kind of testimony along these lines for any conflict ever, and so it was definitely an adjustment to get used to reading all of these things, and then having the vicarious trauma training, getting used to how we process that information. I remember specifically there was one week where I just couldn't do any work at all because I was so mentally overwhelmed by it, and that's another thing that you kind of have to learn to deal with in these sort of contexts, because it's not, even if you've been working on it for a few months and you think, okay, I can handle this workload, this emotion pretty well, it's a little up and down. So there's going to be weeks where it's going to be really hard, and you kind of have to learn to recognize that and try to keep yourself as neutral as possible when you're working through the testimonies. But it overall has been a really fantastic experience. I've never had any knowledge of the region really prior to this. I'd taken a couple courses on Russian history, but I didn't really have much knowledge of Ukraine. So it was really valuable to, as this conflict was starting, kind of learn more about not just the conflict itself, but about the region in more depth, which was a really valuable thing for me to have. And I think another thing that's really worth emphasizing here is the effect that it's had on my career goals. So I kind of went into this project as a junior. I had no idea what I was going to do when I graduated. I was like, okay, I have an international studies and history degree, now what? And so what ended up happening was, after I'd been on the project for about a year, I sort of started to think, and I ultimately decided to make the decision to attend law school. And so I am currently in the process of applying to law schools. I want to be a civil or human rights lawyer, still working out what that is exactly, but I have 3 more years to figure that out. But a lot of that has been guided by this experience, being able to actually do something with the studies that I've had and have a positive impact by helping collect these testimonies has been really valuable. And that's the same thing for a couple of the other students too, as we mentioned. One of the students from last year, she was a senior, and now she's attending University of Virginia for law school. And another student, he's now also graduated, and he's working for the Department of Justice. And all of us have kind of been informed by our experience with the Reckoning Project in what we want to do once we graduate. So I think that, again, really speaks to the importance of this experience. And after I was done with the course this past year, I ended up staying on as a research assistant, which is a paid position, which is nice. But it's also been really great to stick around and have this additional expertise that we can give to the new cohort of Soro students, as we've been on the project for a long time, and kind of helping smooth it out a little bit now that we have a system where we have the testimonies are coded twice. So you have 2 students, you have one that codes it the first time, and then it's double coded. And then one of the other senior RAs will go through and they will proofread the testimony. So now we have it pretty ironed out pretty well. That was something we started working on this summer, to kind of have the process flow as effectively as possible. But yeah, it's overall has been really a wonderful experience. As again, not having any knowledge of the region, but as was mentioned, I am on the Model UN team here, and I have been doing that since high school. So I've always had a pretty strong interest in international affairs, international relations, and I've always wanted to learn more. And I think that, again, really helped guide me to this position so I could learn even more about the region and sort of apply those analytical skills that I've been working on in that capacity. So it's been a really valuable experience.
Thank you, Sophia. And I think that one thing that's really, I believe, for students really valuable is to see that, when you start a research project, you don't always know where you're going. And when students start a PhD, I mean, sometimes it's a hard realization. You get really anxious, but actually there's a lot of false starts and there's a lot of frustration. And for us at the beginning, it was, okay, we need to get those testimonies. We need to archive them in a certain way. We need to develop a flow. We need to negotiate with the owners of those testimonies who are the Reckoning Project, and how they share the data, how we guarantee protection. How we code. I mean, it took us a semester to convince the data team that Excel is not gonna, it takes forever and it's very clunky and you can't do as much. And so the students were part of that process of seeing all the negotiations that happen behind the scenes, and how sometimes you can be like 3 weeks, okay, now it's downtime, there's not much, and then there is a lot. So I think it's a very, for anyone who's interested in research, having this close contact in a research project where you become aware of how research works is very valuable, even if it can be frustrating and you might feel like, oh, I'm not doing anything for those 3 weeks. Well, you're learning that research is often like that. So we tried to pivot, and Arina is the expert in actually getting the flow down to, a T. Worked very, very hard on having a system. Right from the beginning, though, we wanted to make sure that every testimony would be read and coded. I think at the beginning we had 3 people doing this. By 3 students to make sure that this is not, there's some kind of quality control, or because it's qualitative analysis, there would be basically uniformity in coding, and then students could compare with Kristin. Well, I coded this event this way, and you did this way. Why? And then they could, figure this out. So I think that's very important. That it means that 200 testimonies would be coded at least 400 times, if not 600 times, right? So it's a lot of work for the students. And the important thing too is that through those workshops that they would have almost weekly, and through ironing out like these questions of how to code this event or that thing, etc., they provided new categories to the Reckoning Project, to the data team, where they would say, well, we need something about, for example, for a kidnapping, right? So how do I code an event where they're taken from one place, taken to another place, then to a third place, for example? So by actually working very closely with the data, they would come up with new categories, coding categories, that are turning out to be very helpful for the data analysts and for the legal teams. So really, it's research that's helpful in terms of the output, but also the intellectual contribution by reading the data is immense. And I hope you guys realize that, that it's not just like the tedious thing. There's really like thought behind this, and what you're doing is really key.
And if I could just say one more thing about kind of the messiness of the process. Something else that's unique about these testimonies and the way we receive them is that they're not always coherent stories or coherent narratives. And this is, due to the nature of trauma and what we know about how memory works in traumatic situations. But I think that also added to kind of the flexibility you had to have in even approaching the words in front of you, to realize that, this witness may be contradicting parts of their story, or they're not remembering the right details, right, from like an evidentiary standpoint. They're remembering the color of someone's shirt or what their facial expression was. And this is, again, where it's really important that we have both this kind of rigorous analytical way of processing the testimonies, but also the commemorative dimension of like preserving the intimacy, kind of the sacred nature of these testimonies, and knowing that that is still there, parallel with kind of our ways of making them usable, right? So kind of holding those two things in tension is also a really good research lesson, because again, usually you're not concerned with both of those goals.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And now the floor is to well, Arina, do you want me to say something about this? Maybe I should. So one thing that the Reckoning Project asked us is to prepare for them a memo about how to think of commemoration. So the Reckoning Project has two main goals. One is justice, the reckoning with the past, but it's also the preservation of the memory of victims. And so they wanted to know, what can we do to commemorate, and to commemorate as we go, not wait until the end of the war. There are victims now, and actually their experiences is important to recognize right now. So the students and us, we work together to prepare, a memo for them. Teaching them about the difference about physical memorials, for example, traveling exhibits, commemorative actions, and also digital archives. They were also interested in knowing about what could people, Ukrainians in Ukraine, who are living in small towns, big cities, small villages, how can they also participate in the project? And for me, as a sociologist, scholar of memory that has worked on the Holocaust memory. One key thing was to think about what Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto were doing in collecting evidence, for example, about the price of items and where people do things and how they live in very like the everyday life. And how to journal, collect what they might not think as evidence, but is actually relevant. In the Warsaw Ghetto, there was an entire team of people, ordinary Polish Jews and scholars as well. They hid these documents in milk metal boxes that were buried and that were found. Some of them were found after the Second World War and contributes one of the most important archives of everyday life under German Nazi occupation. So we also met with the Reckoning team to give them those examples on how basically people, Ukrainians living under occupation, could also create that kind of archive. However, we decided that the best way at this moment to honor the memory of victims and the lives of Ukrainians under occupation now is to create a digital archive and an interactive map that is meant for students, high school, college, graduate students, educators, teachers, journalists. And this is what we're working on now and that Arina will present.
Okay, hello everyone. I am very excited to talk about the interactive map that has been a plan for quite a while, really. And this feels, to some extent, not a pinnacle of our efforts, but a big key deliverable amongst everything that we do. What is the digital interactive map? What does this entail? So we are going to utilize the Reckoning Project's data to visualize the course of the war and archive the testimonies, as Geneviève said. The main purpose of this map is going to be educational, commemorative, and awareness raising. And our key audience for the case of this specific map is going to be educators. For instance, high school and college instructors, teachers, maybe researchers and journalists who are not exactly deeply familiar with the region and the war in Ukraine. So we are trying, echoing Geneviève, we're trying to present this information in a very user-friendly and accessible way with a person in mind who does not have that much expertise in the region. The map is going to be located on a dedicated website with a corresponding URL. It is currently being developed, and you can see the concept right here. We are very eager to present it quite soon. This website will contain a lot of various information on our side of the project. For instance, you will have a chance to virtually meet our entire team, including all research assistants. We will have the digital map embedded on the website, and this is where you will also be able to find the archive of the testimonies that are connected to the map. And this is how the map looks like as of right now. It is, of course, not publicly available yet. On the map, you can see around 20 testimonies marked with geographical locations. And to give you a perspective on how many testimonies are collected, there are going to be around 300 dots once we complete data entry. And this data entry is going to be ongoing as long as we work on the Reckoning project at WCEE. So this map, as you can see from the name, is interactive. So it means zooming in, zooming out, clicking on any geographical locations that you can see there marked in red. And this is what the zoomed in version looks like. For instance, if you are interested in exploring the situation or the testimonies from a specific region, you're zooming in, you're finding a testimony, you're clicking on it, and you see a pop-up in a sidebar that contains all the key information about this specific testimony. How many witnesses were in this testimony? And to make a little disclaimer, obviously, the Reckoning Project's data that they collect is not representative per se. For instance, it does not reflect the number of crimes committed, obviously, because the resources are limited. Researchers are located in different regions of Ukraine. Some are under occupation. Some testimonies are not permitted to be released publicly because of safety reasons. And therefore, this map is going to present only the data that is permitted to use by the Reckoning Project and the data collected by the Reckoning Project's researchers. So to explore each testimony more and move to the archive, the user would click the Read More button, which will take the user to our website where the archive of the testimonies is located. Here in this, on this webpage, the user will be able to read quotes, direct quotes from the transcript collected by the researchers, read more information about the testimony, and excerpts from the testimonies of each victim. And could you please switch to the website, the live version? We were hoping to show you a draft of the current website that is being developed. These are screenshots, yeah. And obviously this is a very raw page, but I just wanted to show you the testimonies. And could you please scroll down? Scroll down some more, please. Yes, so some of the testimonies contain various kinds of media that obviously is allowed for public release. We are not publishing evidence collected from the witnesses for obvious reasons, because a lot of those cases are a work in progress for legal matters. And please keep scrolling down. Yep. And here you can see the information about the witnesses, but all of it is de-identified, and obviously all the personal information is concealed. You can also see the information about potential perpetrators of this case, those who committed the crime. Could you scroll down some more, please? Usually, this section contains detailed description of the perpetrator from the word of the witness or the witnesses. This is, while it doesn't have a name or a nickname or a call sign attached to it, again for privacy reasons, this is something that the legal team uses to find a potential perpetrator in the future. And scroll down some more, please. Here you can see the excerpts from the testimonies of various witnesses for this specific case in Yahidne, Chernihiv. There were 7 witnesses to this case, and each of them described the situation that they were in. There were around 300 people held captive in the basement without access to proper basic necessities. And it's interesting because here you can see from the testimony of each witness and their excerpts that a lot of them echo each other, and this is how obviously the information is going to get vetted in the future. To have another disclaimer on the testimonies and what makes this map and those testimonies so unique, all of them have been vetted by the Reckoning Project experts, and all of them have been fact-checked. So this is not just your journalistic narrative. The information was collected with the use of Berkeley Protocol, if I'm not mistaken, and it was fact-checked. So this makes this information much more reliable for anyone who would like to use this for educational purposes. Thank you. Could you go back to the presentation? And another dimension of the map that we are creating is going to be quite literally a different map, but also embedded on our website, which is a map of the movement of Russian and Ukrainian troops based on the database provided by Professor Zhukov, who used to be University of Michigan professor, but unfortunately departed for Georgetown recently. Still, we maintain contact, we maintain access to this information. This data is being collected daily, it's being updated daily, and we are hoping to have this map with a chronological bar to kind of supplement the educational purpose of the testimony map that we are creating. To see where the Russian troops were located at the moment of the testimony, to see what the contested territories are, etc., and etc. It is a really good visual tool, and we have really high hopes for its use in the future. Geneviève, do you have anything to add to this?
I would say that the website, the way that we are conceiving it now, is meant also to be buildable. This is a conflict happening now. So as we code more testimonies, we'll be able to add them, but we could also add, buttons that, for example, Chernihiv, the student might not know what is that place besides what we hear in the news, right? So it could have a pop-up window giving the history of the town before the conflict. Once the war is over and reconstruction is in progress, that's also something that we can update with data on the reconstruction process. So what we're making the website, it's hosted at the University of Michigan. That was very important for us. And we're also training students and Arina also to be able to update that ourselves so that we're not reliant on a company or a different service. Although working with the map people here has been very important and useful, and at the University of Michigan, and instructive to know also how they work. So this entire project of the Reckoning Project at WCEE is extremely collaborative, because we work with the Department of Sociology and students enrolled in that course. We work with the Reckoning Project in Ukraine, US, and Western Europe. We work with graphic designer Mike Savitsky, who does a lot of work for the Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia, who came up with basically the fonts and the visuals for that. And then with the U of M, I don't know.
University of Michigan's library, and specifically the digital humanities.
The digital humanities.
Section, yeah.
So I think that this is making it, this is in-house WCEE, University of Michigan, with some, input from outside. But it was very key for us that again, that'd be a University of Michigan project. And I'm going to Berlin in a couple of weeks, actually, to participate in the Reckoning Project conference and their board meeting. And they're very, very impressed by what we've been doing, very impressed with the students, with Arina. I mean, they're very happy by what we're doing. And I think that this is also a resource. When we were thinking about an interactive map and digital humanities, we looked at a lot of maps, and we were inspired by the maps that are provided at the Holocaust Museum, for example, in DC, and other museums where basically they become teaching tools with all sorts of things. So we're kind of inspired by that, with the added difficulty that we are doing this in real time, in a conflict that's ongoing now. So it's very important for us to be kind of nimble and be able to kind of adjust and have the capacity to act quickly. I think that's it. I think that's what.
Yeah, I believe this is everything that we wanted to share for today, and we have some time left for questions. So please approach one of the microphones on the left or right.
Yes.
You can take the line, and we'll be very happy to answer whatever comes with.
Then you can go to the. Thank you, Arina.
Thanks so much. This is a great project and really fascinating to listen to you. I have a couple of questions.
Do you want to say your name?
Oh, yes. I'm Arina from Georgia. I'm political scientist and Weiser fellow here. So I have a couple of questions. I'll divide them in three ways, like three directions. First is more conceptual. I was wondering why you focused only on war crimes, because this is a big conceptual dispute between Ukrainians and also the other Western scholars that it's more than war crimes. It's genocide, actually. And I'm asking this question because it will help you then during the data collection and data, and especially at the phase of data analysis. Because as I was listening to you, you are using more exploratory way to search for certain patterns rather than you have pre-coded central topics. And if you went for the genocide crimes, then it will be like you have already in the convention the article. Mm-hmm. You have already the article that specifies what constitutes to genocide, and it will make it easy for you to code and to show that patterns, even if to someone who wants to analyze it quantitatively, not only qualitative. This was one methodological and conceptual question, and another was one about more technical things. Which years and periods you focused on while collecting the data from the map? It was figured out what were the regions. You covered all the Ukrainian regions, but how you selected the respondents, like who collected the data, like female, male, age group, and all these things like that. And the final question is about legal. So you mentioned very often that there is a legal expert who can use it. But as someone who worked during the August war when Russia attacked Georgia in prosecution service, we were taken to South Ossetia, some of us, not me, to collect the data. And I was not selected because I didn't have diploma. I was paralegal. I was translator, but I was not the legal expert. So what I was told that the collected data that by you won't be considered admissible evidence at the court because there is the penal procedure code of Georgia and it should be follow all the strict rules, how you collect data and how to put it before the court. So is it academic part, how legal experts will use it, or this is they will be presented to the court and then to what extent this could be recognized as admissible evidence collected by someone who is not a legal by definition or an investigator part to the prosecution? Thank you.
So for the first question, yes, we are given actually by the legal team, and it's a legal team that has worked in other conflicts, in Syria most recently. So they have like a general coding scheme that we were provided. We're not talking about we're not just looking at war crimes, and actually we say potential war crimes because you need to demonstrate that these are war crimes, right? So they're looking at crimes against civilian population, but also against national heritage, so a variety of crimes. They are using, and Arina can say the exact, they are using protocol actually, and the grid that was initially provided to us is standard legal categories that will be used for that. What I was saying is that those categories sometimes were very broad and did not include, did not capture all of the kind of interesting things that would be happening, just like the change of location in something that's about detention, for example, because those testimonies can be very detailed, and we wanted to provide subcategories in the ones that the Reckoning Project had provided us in order to capture, you know, a finer grain level of information. So that's the, I don't know if you want to say what the...
Yeah, I would like to follow up on Genevieve's words just to emphasize and make it clear that we are not collecting information in the field. We are assisting the Reckoning Project, which is an international NGO, who has researchers and reporters trained under guidance of established legal experts, and as Geneviève said, following protocols, to collect the data. And because they closely interact with International Criminal Court and the Criminal Court of Ukraine, and they consult with them what kind of data collected by whom, a person with which credentials is admissible. This is their role in it. They establish the kind of data that they can present in court.
Right. That's the whole point of the Reckoning Project, was to have also local people. So they are collecting testimonies in localities in which they are embedded or surrounding that they can travel to. So these are Ukrainians who have been in Ukraine and then are collecting this, and they're being trained, as I mentioned in my introduction, in workshops on how to collect data that will be then recognized as eligible in the court, to avoid scenarios like the one that Janine Di Giovanni experienced, where she was a U.S. reporter covering Rwanda or Bosnia, and then she goes to The Hague and they say, well, your notes, they don't contain what we need. Or you interviewed this person just after that person was raped, for example, and it's not admissible because she was obviously traumatized, et cetera, et cetera. So we're not training the reporters and the researchers. They are doing this, and that's something that's happening in Ukraine, and most of the analysis that we're doing is also going to the Attorney General of Ukraine so that the crimes can be prosecuted first. At least Ukrainian courts have the first, I don't want to say the first dib, but basically they're deciding what will be prosecuted in Ukraine and what can be forwarded then to the ICC.
And to sum up, the Reckoning Project's delegation met with the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, and their work was highly praised and encouraged. So I assume it's safe to say that the researchers who are in the field are eligible to provide court-admissible data. As for the genocide, it's quite a complicated matter, and I don't believe we can speak on it because the Reckoning Project does have scholars and experts working specifically on the genocidal dimension of this war, and some patterns that the legal experts discover, they might be used to constitute a potential crime of genocide, but the code book that we are provided, we can provide our recommendations, but we cannot advise to go from top to bottom, if that makes sense,
Right.
from the genocidal intent down to the detail level. It works the opposite way.
Right. I know that you guys wanted to have, Mary, you have a
I have a
question?
question, but I'm also doing this so people realize if you want to ask a question, you have
Yeah.
Yeah.
to come up.
Yuri and Oksana, I know that you had questions. You might want to go on either side. Yes.
I have a question based on an experience I had this summer when I was in Berlin, and there's, the war in Ukraine is very close in a place like Berlin. And one of the researchers I met was doing an interesting experiment with a similar kind of data, although her data was historical, so her data was on the Holocaust. And she was asking people to volunteer to code data on the Holocaust. But she was using it as an experiment to also measure what happened to people as they did this work. And she was particularly interested. I saw that you're doing this vicarious trauma training, which I think is really important for people who engage in this kind of data collection. She was using it to test whether or not doing this kind of work changed the way in which Germans thought about the Holocaust, but also in terms of how it made Germans think about refugees now. Mm-hmm. And I thought that that was an interesting thing for this project as well to consider, because we know that support for the war in Ukraine in the United States has wavered recently. And it's partly because people can, ignore what's happening or not read the news. And so I think it would be a way in which also to demonstrate that this may have an impact on how people think about the war and the support for the war.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that what Sophia was saying about her own career goals, but also about, and I should say that there's another participant in the program that started last fall, decided also to go and volunteer in Poland with Ukrainian refugees. So it does have an impact because those testimonies are very intimate. As Kristin mentioned. And so that's one thing that brings the war very close. It's not, and then a lot of testimonies that we got from our students when we asked them in course evaluations what they learned. I mean, they say this is not just something happening far, this is not just a statistics, it's not a number, it's a person. And then you feel the person's pain about, losing a loved one, or they're talking about all sorts of things, about their pets also. That's different things that make the experience of the war very, very close and personal. And I think that's very important. That's why we want also testimonies to be available, so that when teachers go and they want to teach about Ukraine, or they might want to teach about the Holocaust too, or about other genocides and other wars, they can go and see, okay, this is what, someone is telling about this and is still in Ukraine and is suffering in horrendous conditions, so that it brings the experience even of other conflicts also closer to people who might read about this.
Before we move on to the next question, I just wanted to add some things on vicarious trauma training. This is something that we do for our students, but the researchers in the field in Ukraine, they have access to psychologists, they have access to the resources that obviously help them manage a completely different, much harder kind of trauma that they experience by collecting primary data firsthand in the field. Still, we believe that even though the students work with secondary data, it's very important to be aware of the risks, even though they're drastically different from what the data collectors are going through.
My name is Oksana Chabanyuk. I am the WCEE scholar, Kharkiv National University for Urban Economy. I have several parts which I want to reflect, and in each of them I will have several questions or maybe suggestions, because you are in the process still.
Yes.
So first of all, I'm curious about the methodology that you are using. I'm not the sociologist, but the set of tools, are they totally innovative, or they were already developed, the set of tools that you are implementing and you are using in this research? Another part is about the sensitivity of data. I mean, about the part of my reflection. I'm very amazed, actually, that you have that you do part of this project in the frame of the course, as students are exposed to really very sensitive and hard information, very difficult. In this sense, I wanted to ask, for instance, do they sign any documents which are about the data protection? I know that if they're just a research project, that doesn't involve students, but the researchers, and this kind of information documents exist. I told that I'm amazed that you are involving students so much, as they finally know from the testimonies the data that can influence them. I also wanted to point, or as you are in the research process that you are still doing the project, the map that is interactive map that will be in the website, of course it will be a very good digital resource for all, as it is the visual information. But what I didn't see, or what could be very helpful for the understanding how, for instance, the territories were invaded during the months during the war on territory of Ukraine, if we would see the centers of the regions on the map, the cities, because some of them were already invaded, occupied before the war, that started as full-scale invasion on the 24th of February. Because from 2014, Lugansk and Donetsk were already under the occupation. And in this case, I also, when I am hearing in the international environment that the word conflict is used, I'm trying to ask, as a representative of Ukraine, not to use, because this is the war, as conflict is in the definition, is the disagreement or the argument. There wasn't any. So it's not the conflict. And I think that many of my colleagues will agree with this last suggestion. Thank you.
Yes, you're absolutely right. No conflict, no crisis, war, invasion, occupation. Thank you for reminding us. In terms of, and I will let Arina and Kristin speaking, but yes, I mean, all data is protected. All data is scrubbed of any identifiers so that students never see any name, address. They will know from where the city, the person, either the victim or the witnesses. but we are very careful about that. The way that data is provided to us also is protected. We use protected servers, it's password. I mean, we are extremely careful about this. Some of them, that's interesting, because some of those testimonies, we might receive them with identifiers because they might have been used already in news reports in Ukraine or elsewhere by journalists with permission of the people, and we still scrub those. We still make sure to remove any identifying, name, address, phone numbers, I mean, all of that. Arina, you might want to say a few words about actually, I mean, because that's done like several times to make sure that nothing is basically appears.
Absolutely. Speaking about the Reckoning Project, the NGO, they collect consent from every interviewee, every witness that they interview. And as Geneviève said, sometimes this data that we get, it's sometimes de-identified, sometimes it contains personal identifiers. It does go through extensive check before we pass it along, even to translators, because to avoid any precedence of this data being spread around, and obviously this is not what's going to happen, but all data is scrubbed extensively. And to address Oksana's concern about the sensitivity of the topic, that is definitely, I can see how these materials could be viewed as very harsh and too much for the students. The students are being made aware of the risks, not the risks, but of the type of content that they will be working with prior to starting coding. So they are given a document that they're going through, that you will encounter these types of content, these types of triggers, etc., etc. They signed this document that they were aware. And only after this and vicarious trauma training and
peers
human subject
certification,
protection training and research ethics training, this is when they start coding. And I will allow Kristin to speak more on the methodology because that's a great question.
But before you go to this, I want to say also, we interview students. It's not that people can just sign up and they're on. Yeah. We have way more applicants than the ones we select. And we select people based on their personality, how we think they can handle the material, discretion, and,
former experience.
But basically, we select people we trust, and we impress on them the importance of discretion. They are instructed not to discuss anything that they're reading to friends, classmates, roommates, etc. So we take this very, very seriously, and we're very careful about any of these issues.
At the same time, because the Reckoning Project is a publicity and a journalistic project to some extent, our precautions might be unnecessary, but this is just us, trying to be as secure about it as possible, while the Reckoning Project might not have such strict guidelines for some data that they publish.
Right, the Reckoning Project as journalists.
Yes, journalists.
So when they're writing a piece for Vanity
filming
Fair
someone.
or The Atlantic or something like this, they might provide information. And then actually we remove that from the coding for our students. So the Reckoning Project has both reporting and a legal aspect and a commemorative. We're working on analyzing data for the legal aspect and for the memorial aspect.
Yeah, and just to say a few more words on kind of the training we get or we provide in like human subjects. So the university already has these kind of very set trainings under the peers office that I don't even know what the acronym stands for, but research, engagement, something. And so we had all of the students go through that, which also is helpful just to have that certification active for other projects they work on. And then another thing too is shifting from, because some aspects really are like student-centered, but these are also like research assistants. So I think that shift, even when I'm like sending emails to some of the NGO staff, like I'll, use the phrase research assistant. So we're not, the course is kind of just the organizing structure, but I think still are applying the like practice-based stuff is the priority. And then
The methodology.
the methodology.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we started with this Excel sheet that we were sent, and we were saying, plug in the testimonies into these categories. So kind of very like rudimentary social science text-based analysis is, or even what a historian would do too, like not even social science. And so our shift was mainly just to enforce the intercoder reliability. So just having multiple people look at something and code it. And then also to use this software that, Alice TI is, there's also like NVivo, Deduce. It's kind of a general class of qualitative coding that sociologists use and anyone working with text.
And I would say that the chief data analyst in the Reckoning project is Syrian. And so the initial coding categories were also taken from his analysis of testimonies collected in the war in Syria. So they're basically based on legal categories and had been used. And that's one reason why he was so insistent at the beginning using Excel as a way to code, to extract information from testimonies, is because that's what he had used in the war in Syria, until we convinced him to move to something that's a little bit more robust. I don't know if Sophia, you want to respond also. You said something about the impact of reading those testimonies, but I think that was one of the concerns that whether students are ready to read this or the impact it has on them.
Yeah, definitely. I can kind of speak to that a little bit. Obviously, like having gone through like all of the vicarious trauma training and the peers modules, I kind of knew what to expect, but not entirely, because you can never predict exactly what you're going to read in a testimony. And it was only like after like I'd gotten like a few months into the project that I just kind of had like a bad week, like personally on my end, and so that made the testimonies like really hard for me that particular week. But I think the most important thing is like, I think no matter who you are, no matter how much experience you have, like there's always going to be some sort of like difficult emotional effect that reading a testimony like that is going to have on you, because maybe one is going to remind you of something else that's going to be pretty difficult for you to read. But I think the key thing is just like having all the training and having the mental preparation to say, okay, I know that this is going to happen, and there's probably going to be a week or two where it's going to be really hard for me to deal with these testimonies, but having that training and knowing when you kind of need to take a break, or helping you separate like your emotions from what you're actually reading on the paper, is just sort of a skill that you have to like develop. And I think with all the students I've worked with, it seems like everybody's done a pretty good job with that. So it's just kind of having that preparation background, because I think that could happen to like anybody, regardless of how much experience they have with the testimony.
Right. I think we have two questions, Katerina and Yuri. I don't know who's first.
Katerina was first.
Maybe you can go.
Okay, can you hear me? Good morning, good afternoon already. I am Katerina Serenyok-Dolgareva, WCEE scholar at risk from Ukraine, Zaporizhia National University. First of all, I want to say thank you, because as a Ukrainian, I understand how unique this project is and how important it is for the whole nation on this global, I am not afraid to say, a global scale. And my question is a kind of follow-up. As a journalist, a media scholar, I'm interested, do you discuss which of the material would be published as a journalist piece? Because obviously I understand not all of the testimonials are published. And do you have that discussion in your team before it is going to be published? And in Ukraine, there is another question is, in Ukraine, there is a huge issue right now called secondary traumatizing of audience, because you were talking about a lot about trauma for people who work with this content, but people in Ukraine are exposed to this content all the time. So do you talk about that in your project? And it's interesting what discussions you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Katerina. About the decision of what gets published, that's something that the journalists at the Reckoning Project is doing. We're not involved in that, but they do discuss this. And they also, Janine DiGiovanni and Peter Pomerantsev are really helping the local reporters also publish in North American, European outlets, so that the local reporters are not just being used as collectors of data, but also are writing long stories that are getting published in very prominent outlets, so that it's not just extraction or use of resources from Ukraine. About the re-traumatization, I mean, I think that is a risk. I think this is a risk also that Ukrainian people are conscious about, and in general, willing to take the risk, because the benefit is that you keep people informed. And that, as Mary mentioned before, I mean, support for Ukraine is key. I think we're about to be at we're at a critical juncture, and keeping people informed and really sensitizing people to what is going on there is crucial. So that might involve re-traumatizing, but they're already, I'm just coming back also from Poland, where we were training 24 leaders of Ukrainian NGOs. And it's clear that for them, whatever help we can provide, and this is help. This is help because we make this public in the public sphere. And this is why the digital map, the project, is meant not just to be, not just academic. We want it to be out in the world. I'm not sure how much Ukrainians would be using this. This is also, as Arina mentioned, this is not a representation of all violence against Ukrainians and the Ukrainian army and Ukrainian civilians. This is only based on the testimonies of victims and witnesses that were collected by this specific NGO. But because of the vetting process and because of what we can do with this, we believe that this has a very important, it can potentially play a very important role. And we are very grateful for the suggestions you have, because this is helping us think about the website having a life outside of academia. And I think that's crucial.
And to sum up, how do we know what do we publish or not? For instance, on the website, it's all in the database. It has two columns, like this is publishable, this is not publishable. Consent was given, consent was not given. So obviously we're not using the materials where the consent was not given. And so we'll probably take the last question before we wrap up.
Thank you very much for your great and very important job and work on this topic. My name is Yuri Kaparulin. I'm a fellow at Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia at Scholar at Risk program. And I'm also presenting my Kherson State University in Ukraine. So my question about the testimonies themselves. I see in your work two main perspectives for me, like a historian and legal scholar. So as I understood, the legal perspective and approach in this work is in priority. But in the future, I see a possibility to use this testimony for historian research, and this is my question to the sources themselves. When these sources is collecting, are they collecting from only legal perspective, and or are interviewers use also oral history approaches? And what are you receiving from the ground? Are you receiving some only text version of this testimonies, or interviewers recording the full interview in video, because comparing with my research in Holocaust studies, I see it's very important to have maybe interview video version, because for historians it's very important to see the person, not only the script of this interview. Thank you so much.
So I think that they are taped. I don't know if they're always videotaped. It might depend on the mental, physical state of the witness, the person interviewed. We do not receive the transcript, the verbatim transcripts. We receive what the journalist who has conducted the interview, narrates from the interview, because the interview could be 50 pages long or 100 pages long, and with a lot of back and forth, stops, sometimes witnesses have a hard time continuing, etc. Those transcripts, however, are available, and they may become available to us or to others later down the road. At this point, they're not, because what was key is to have a summary of this also, so that the legal team can use this. Translating a 100-page transcript is very difficult. But I think that they are conscious, and we've been training them actually on also the fact that they are constituting an archive, even though the archive might not be published right away. So.
Right, and to add to this about the oral history part, because the Reckoning Project collaborates with Public Interest Journalism Lab, a lot of the interviews are being taped specifically from the journalist and oral history perspective, and they are publicly available. And even those which are not publicly available, there are video materials for the majority of them, or audio materials, or Zoom calls, etc., and etc. So, as Yuri mentioned, I personally see big potential for this to be a big base of historical material in the future. But I see all those materials by the nature of having access as a research coordinator, but none of those materials are getting passed to the students or other members of the team. This is a work to be done in the future in project.
But we think that the website would have that potential, so that actually we could be a repository of a significant archive that can be used down the road. I think we have to finish here now. There will be a break, and then we have our keynote address on Ukraine with Dr. Jean Fischel. But during or after lunch or any time today, I would very much like to invite you to a fabulous exhibition that the Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia organized on the 5th floor. So you just take the elevator, come out, and you will see the exhibition that's called Guardian Passage, and it is showcasing art pieces by a local Ukrainian ceramist, Irina Bodarenko, who is right here in the back, and by Katya Lisova. And it is a multimedia exhibit, and please go see it, because it's fabulous, it's very impactful, and it deserves to be seen. And we also left postcards of this on the tables and outside. And I also invite you, I'm sorry, I'm going to be a promotional. Here is the annual report of the Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia, the 2022-2023. Please look at what we've done. We're presenting only a little slice of what we did regarding Ukraine, the Reckoning Project, but you've also heard 3 of our fellows, the Scholars at Risk. So we created fellowships to host initially 7 scholars from Ukraine together with their families, their children. 4 of them are still with us this year, and they're teaching at the Center for Russian, Eastern European, and Eurasian Studies and at the Taubman School for Architecture. We're very proud of our work supporting Ukraine academics, journalists, students, and we have a lot more initiatives on this. And I'd be remiss not to mention the generosity of our donors, Regent Ron Weiser, who has given financial resources that make it possible for us to do all of this. And last but not least, our staff. I have an amazing team at the Weiser Center. And so Arina is the research coordinator, but we have Bill Bryan, who's the new manager, and Gita Kohler, Gosia Kowalczyk, who's the coordinator, event coordinator, Liz Malinkin. We have also Rachel Brichta, who does our communication. Derek, he's not here. Derek Groom, who's managing also our NGO training workshop with Ukrainians and other Eastern European. And we also have in the room the former manager and one of the key architects of the Weiser Centers, Marisha Ostafin. So I want to, I mentioned Liz, right? Liz Maninkin too. Did I forget anyone? Susan Barrera. Yes, okay. Did I forget anyone? No, I think I mentioned everyone. So thank you, everyone. Have lunch, mingle, and we will see you very shortly with the keynote lecture.
Thank you.